The Quincy are among the most mythologically dense constructs in Bleach, a series that has always used religious and symbolic architecture more seriously than its shonen contemporaries. On the surface, Quincy read as a foil to the Shinigami, where Shinigami purify, Quincy destroy. Where Soul Society operates through institutional hierarchy, the Wandenreich operates through absolute theocracy and totalitarianism. But a deeper design of the Quincy draws from a specific and deliberate well, the imagery, terminology, and theological weight of Abrahamic tradition, filtered through the particular lens of Germanic and Hebrew source material. Their patriarch's name alone announces this. YHWACH is a direct rendering of the Tetragrammaton, Yahweh, the unspeakable name of God in the Hebrew Bible. He is framed not as a conqueror with political ambitions, but as a deathless figure, the origin of a people, the father of a lineage that carries fragments of his soul, and a being whose return is encoded in prophecy. The Kaiser Gesang, the song that counts down his resurrection, functions as scripture, sung and memorized by a people whose entire civilization is organized around waiting for him to wake up. The Stanritters are assigned letters of the alphabet as epithets, echoing the Kabbalistic tradition of sacred language and the idea that letters carry metaphysical weight. Even the word Quincy itself derives from the Latin quintus, meaning fifth, a number with deep resonance in occult and religious numerology, a number that also represents their main symbol, the five-pointed Quincy star. Their history is not merely a conflict with the Shinigami over hollow disposal. It is the story of a people born from the second closest figure to a deity of this world, shaped by his power and then progressively annihilated by an institution that could not accommodate what they represented, culminating not in defeat but in a 1,000-year vigil inside the walls of their enemy, sustained by stolen reishi, waiting for the prophesied moment. What follows traces that history from the beginning, who YHWACH was, how the Quincy came to exist, how they organized themselves, how they were broken, and what survived. YHWACH's name comes directly from Yahweh, the Tetragrammaton, the four-letter name of God in the Hebrew Bible, which appears nearly 7,000 times in the text and is never spoken aloud. Jewish tradition substitutes Adonai, Lord, whenever the letters are encountered in reading, because the name itself is considered too sacred for ordinary speech. Adonai is also similar to the name of the Soul King, Adonais, further confirming the origin. Kubo rendered these four letters into Roman script, added a vowel for readability, and gave the result to his villain king. That vowel that allows us to even read his name being A, the very letter YHWACH holds the power of, the Almighty. What this does for the character, beyond the obvious signal that he is operating on a theological scale, is position him in a very specific kind of relationship with the people he leads. The God of the Hebrew Bible is not an abstract force. He enters into specific covenants, grieves specific losses, acts in history in ways that are responsible and relational. He is defined as much by his relationship to his people as by his power. YHWACH is built on this model. He is not simply the strongest Quincy, he is the being the Quincy are made of. It is also important to note a fact the arc reveals late. YHWACH is the son of the Soul King, the supreme entity of the Bleach universe, the being whose existence maintains the boundary between the three worlds. This makes YHWACH not simply a powerful enemy, but a figure with a direct claim on the cosmic order, the heir of the being the Shinigami, imprisoned and mutilated to maintain their system. His war against Soul Society, from his perspective, is not just a war of revenge for the Quincy genocide, it is a son reclaiming a world that was built on his father. Before we continue with YHWACH and break down everything that he is and everything that he represents, let's take a look at the timeline and try our best to understand the history and chronological events that gave birth to YHWACH and his people and their importance within the broken world of Bleach. YHWACH was born approximately 1,200 years ago as the son of the Soul King, though the circumstances of his birth, including who his mother was, are never explained. Does he even have a mother? What exactly is meant by him being the son of the Soul King anyways? Is it a biological birth or a spiritual one? Knowing what they are and how they function, it would make more sense for it to be the latter in the messed up spiritually dense cosmology of Bleach. YHWACH came into the world blind, deaf, unable to speak or move. What he possessed, however, was an involuntary power. Fragments of his soul would transfer into anyone who touched him, healing them or granting them strength, regrowing their limbs, giving sight to the blind and strength to the weak. When those people died, their souls returned to him, and through this gradual accumulation, he eventually regained his senses and his body. The people touched and empowered by him became Quincy, humans capable of manipulating Reishi. Notably, Quincy existed before YHWACH, though rarely, born every few decades. These early Quincy were considered failures and were historically called. YHWACH recognized them as sharing his own nature and sought them out. How exactly this pre-existing Quincy lineage relates to the broader race he came to lead is not clarified in the canon. In time, YHWACH founded the Lille, a Quincy kingdom, and waged war to bring all Quincy under his rule. He was eventually approached by Ichibe Hyosube of Squad Zero, who offered terms of peace. The Quincy could unify freely so long as they permitted the Balancers to maintain the order between worlds. Let the Shinigami deal with the Hollows and the balance. YHWACH, knowing the three worlds were once one, rejected the offer. Ichibe responded by using the Soul King's own left arm to seal away YHWACH's signature ability, the Almighty, leaving him weakened. In this diminished state, YHWACH invaded Soul Society and fought Yamamoto directly. He was defeated, stabbed from behind by Chojuro Sasakibe, then finished by Yamamoto, and subsequently sealed away until he comes back. He always does. The surviving Quincy fled into the shadows of Soul Society and hid in the Wandenreich, the invisible empire, sustained by the ambient Rishi of the Seriete while they waited for YHWACH's return. Their wait was governed by the Kaiser Gesang, a prophetic song that counted down his resurrection in intervals. 900 years to regain his heartbeat, 90 more years for his intellect, and 9 more for his power. The last achieved through Auswählen, the forced reclamation of power from impure, gemischt Quincy. Among those killed in his final step, 9 years before the main story, was Ishida's mother, Katagiri, and the reclamation of power led to the death of Kurosaki Masaki. The mothers of the series' protagonists, including the main Quincy of the narrative. When a Quincy child is born, a fragment of YHWACH's soul enters them. This is the actual mechanism of Quincy power. What makes a Quincy is a piece of YHWACH living inside them, growing alongside the person, becoming indistinguishable from their own spiritual identity. As an infant, he himself was completely unable to see, hear, speak, or move. People who touched him were healed of their afflictions, but they died soon afterward, with their souls gradually returning to YHWACH. His first followers gave their lives to him without knowing it. This is how the Quincy began, not as a people YHWACH created, but as a people he grew from. It was them who started calling him YHWACH in the first place, naming him after their deity. He simply claimed that name and accepted it. Maybe the reason YHWACH was nameless and senseless was because of the monk who calls the real name, stripping him from his power and name. Ichibe did seal his power once, and he will later face him and try to seal his name and power again. Perhaps just like he painted him and attempted to erase his power, he did it to him when he was an infant, fearing what he would become and what he would try to do, explaining the dark appearance of YHWACH when he was a child, before gaining a name and powers and removing the ink. Ichibe was around when the Soul King was sealed after all. Knowing his nature and intentions, this theory carries weight. Over centuries, YHWACH refined this process of granting power to his people. He developed the Schrift system, a ritual in which a Quincy drinks YHWACH's blood, allowing him to carve a letter into their soul, awakening a specific ability. Each Stammritter carries one of these letters as their designation. The letter is not merely a label, it is a fragment of YHWACH's total power given a specific, focused form in a specific person. When that person dies, the fragment returns to YHWACH, enriched by everything they experienced during their life. The mythological parallel for this is Odin in Norse tradition. Not Odin simply as the most powerful deity, but Odin as the being who expands his knowledge and strength. Through continuous collection, every morning Odin sends his ravens Hugin and Munin, thought and memory, across the world. And every evening they return carrying what they have seen. He hangs himself on Yggdrasil for 9 days to acquire the runes. He gathers dead warriors from battlefields across centuries into Valhalla. He is defined by the process of sending himself outward and receiving himself back enriched. YHWACH's soul cycle is this mechanism made biological and personal. Fragments of himself go out, live, die, and return with what they gathered. The Auswählen, German for selection, is YHWACH's ability to forcibly reclaim soul fragments from Quincy he deems unworthy, killing them in the process. The columns of light that descend on his targets strip them of their power and their lives in one motion, whether he does it to impure Quincy upon his revival or to his own Stammritters in battle. There is only one gemished Quincy who has survived Auswählen, Ishida Uryu. His survival of something that killed every other person in his category is the reason YHWACH later designates him as his successor. The German word Selektion was used at Auschwitz and other Nazi extermination camps for the process of selecting arriving prisoners for labor or immediate death. It was conducted on train platforms by officers making rapid judgments about who was useful and who was not. Kubo's use of the cognate Auswählen in a story built around a near genocide of the Quincy is not accidental. It builds the logic of the historical persecution into the mythology of the king who leads the persecuted. YHWACH does to his own Quincy what the Soul Society did to all the Quincy, and uses the same kind of language to describe it. Selection, holy selection in the Japanese. YHWACH's personal Schrift is A, the Almighty, Allwissend in German. At its base level, it grants him precognition across all possible futures simultaneously. Every branch path of causality from any given moment, every choice anyone could make, every outcome those choices lead to. In its fully activated state, it goes further. He can not only see futures but rewrite them, selecting which possibility becomes real. He does not predict, he decides. The theological concept this power embodies is predestination. YHWACH's Almighty is this doctrine given a combat application. He fights people in a world where the outcome is, from his perspective, already settled. He spent years in his sealed dormancy after his first defeat, unable to act while the returning soul fragments of dying Quincy slowly restored what had been taken from him. The prophecy attached to him, known as the Kaisergesang, described his revival in stages. After 900 years, the sealed king would recover his heartbeat. After 90 more, his intellect. After 9 more, his power. And over 9 days, he would recover the world. Each stage required the specific accumulation of souls over the specific period. He could not simply be strong and act. He had to pass through each phase, accumulating and waiting. This structure mirrors Odin's preparation for Ragnarok in Norse mythology. Odin knows the final war is coming. Rather than simply exist powerfully in the present, he sacrifices endlessly. His eye for wisdom, 9 days on Yggdrasil for the runes, century after century gathering warriors into Valhalla. because the scale of what is coming requires a preparation that cannot be shortcut. The period of limitation and sacrifice is the condition of the final power. YHWACH's almost 1,000-year sealed dormancy is the condition of his eventual absolute power, and when he wakes, as when Ragnarok arrives in the Norse texts, both sides have been preparing for the confrontation for as long as anyone alive can remember. When YHWACH led the Lichtreich in a full invasion of Soul Society, that war ended with YHWACH's defeat and the surviving Quincy withdrew, some into the human world, others into the hidden space they would call the Wandenreich. The second, quieter annihilation came approximately 2 centuries later. Most of the remaining Quincy were exterminated by Soul Society around 200 years before the events of Bleach, with their numbers monitored and allowed to dwindle in the aftermath. What the canon does not clarify is whether this massacre was a coordinated campaign or a prolonged attrition. The details of how it unfolded are not simply laid out. In the years following the extermination, the surviving Quincy put forward a practical compromise. Since they were already present in the human world and still more numerous than available Shinigami, they could serve as first responders to hollow attacks, protecting humans until a Shinigami could arrive to finish the job. The Shinigami, still bitter from the war, simply refused, concentrating their limited sources only on the most dangerous threats. Soken Ishida, Uryu's grandfather, was the last person to advocate seriously for this arrangement. He was killed by a group of hollows before Shinigami arrived. According to Mayuri Kurotsushi, he then conducted experiments on Soken's body and soul along with what remained of the dwindling Quincy, drilling holes in their skulls while they were still alive, forcing them to burn their own children, etc. 9 years before the main story, YHWACH's Auswählen killed Masaki Kurosaki and Kanae Katagiri. And when the Wandenreich finally emerged to wage the 1,000-year blood war, it was with that full weight of history behind it. 2 massacres, 1 unsealed king, and centuries of refused compromise. What the story leaves unaddressed is whether any formal peace was ever genuinely possible, and what Soul Society's full internal record of these events actually says. The bias in what gets revealed runs almost entirely through the manga, through the Shinigami's institutional perspective and the Quincy's own retelling of the story. Paired with the scattered pieces of history and conflicting accounts, it is genuinely impossible to know the absolute clear history. Isshin said that the Quincy all came from YHWACH and that he is their origin, but Bazz B's backstory tells us otherwise, and YHWACH's infant state and encounter with the ancient Quincy. In the anime, we get an original scene of YHWACH watching as his father, the Soul King, separates the 3 worlds, which conflicts with YHWACH's latest confirmed age, that of 1,200 years. After the First War, the surviving Quincy that did not retreat to the human world retreated into Soul Society itself. Using reishi, they carved out a hidden dimension within the shadows of the Serete, a place they called the Schattenbereich. Because this place existed within the same location as the Serete but in a separate dimension, it was entirely undetectable to the Shinigami. This became the Wandenreich, the Invisible Empire, built entirely from the reishi of Soul Society and sustained by it. At its center stood Silbern, a vast ice-covered palace surrounded by a city roughly comparable in scale to the Serete itself. The fact they were already inside Soul Society meant they never needed to breach its walls. They had been hiding within them all along. The Wandenreich was structured as an absolute theocracy or a monarchy under YHWACH, with his advisor Jugram serving beneath him. Its military elites were the Stenditter, the Star Knights, each assigned a letter of the alphabet corresponding to an epithet that reflected their particular ability, with power comparable to or exceeding that of the Gote 13 captains. The Schutzstaffel serve as YHWACH's personal guard, drawn from among the most powerful Stenditter. Below them were the normal Stenditters, the elite Star Knights, and below them were common Quincy soldiers known as Soldat. The Empire had no civilian class in any meaningful sense, Everyone within it existed in preparation for the eventual war. There was, however, a significant schism within the Quincy population. The distinction between Echt and gemischt Quincy, pure-blooded and mixed-blooded. Gemischt Quincy were those whose lineage mixed with non-Quincy humans over generations. When YHWACH performed YHWACH, it was specifically the gemischt Quincy whose power he reclaimed and killed, deeming their blood impure. The Echt were spared. Not all Quincy remained within the Wandenreich. Soken Ishida, a necked Quincy and a former member of the Wandenreich, was exiled after refusing to accept the concept of Quincy evolution, preferring the older Letzt still technique over the newer Vollstandig, and opposing YHWACH's willingness to kill impure Quincy to restore his own power. When he fled, he used the Gate of the Sun to escape the Schattenbereich and took with him a device capable of activating the gate again, the same device his son Ryuken would later use to re-enter the Quincy city. Soken settled in the human world where he raised and trained his son and grandson in Quincy arts while advocating for cooperation with the Shinigami. The Ishida family represents what remained of the Echt Quincy in the human world. Soken's wife, Izumi, was herself an Echt Quincy, and she took the preservation of pure Quincy lineage seriously. To that end, she adapted Kurosaki Masaki into the Ishida household, intending for her to eventually marry Ryuken and continue the bloodline, as Masaki was the last surviving member of another Echt Quincy family. That plan collapsed when Masaki was infected by a Hollow's spirit through Aizen's experiments, rendering a union between Echt Quincy impossible. Ryuken instead married Kanae Katagiri, a gemischt Quincy who served the Ishida family. Their son Uryu was therefore born gemischt. How many other isolated Quincy families may have survived outside the Wandenreich in the human world beyond Ishida line? What the full internal social structure of the Wandenreich looked like below its military hierarchy, we don't know. However, the reason Uryu himself survived the YHWACH despite being a gemischt Quincy is because of his unique dormant ability, the antithesis. The Quincy wear white. Every Sternritter uniform, every Wandenreich soldier's cloak, all whites always. In a manga where Soul Reapers wear black, this is a theological statement before it is a costume choice. Kubo designed two peoples who occupy opposite ends of a color axis, and the opposition is not good versus evil, but two different traditions of sacred power, each claiming legitimacy from different sources. In Western religious tradition, white is the color of the angels and of divine transformation. The Quincy whose elite soldiers transform into angelic forms in battle were the color of that tradition. They are dressed in the color the Western religious imagination associates with transcendence. In Japanese cultural tradition, white is the color of mourning and of death, of funeral shrouds and of the body being prepared for burial. The Quincy in white, carrying centuries of unprocessed grief from their near annihilation, are also dressed in the color of the mourner who has not been permitted to stop mourning. And in the Hebrew Bible, the high priest changes into white linen on Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. The Quincy, organized around a king whose name comes from that same tradition, wear the color of that highest service. Quincy fight through a cross-shaped spirit weapon, the Quincy cross, worn as an accessory through which the Heilig Bogen, holy bow, is manifested. Every arrow a Quincy fires is formed through the shape of a cross. In Christian iconography, the cross is first an instrumental of execution, and then, through the Passion narrative, the central symbol of a tradition built around a death that led to continuation. For the Quincy, the cross is the weapon through which they fight, which means their entire combat practice is structured around the central symbol of sacrifice and the covenant sealed by death. This is not incidental to the aesthetic, it is the aesthetic. They are people who have survived near annihilation, and who fight through the shape of the thing that represents the covenant that requires death. The cross also carries its geometric symbolism, the intersection of the vertical, the divine moving from above down, with the horizontal, the human moving through the world. The Quincy are literally that intersection, beings in whom a fragment of YHWACH's soul meets an individual human life. Their weapon is the shape of what they are. Every important Quincy term is in German. Wandenreich, Schattenbereich, Auswählen, Heiligbefehl, Vollstandig, Stirnritter, Schutzstaffel, Blutvene and Blutarterie, the two forms of blood, the Quincy defensive and the offensive technique. The language is total and deliberate, functioning as a cultural grammar that shapes how the reader experiences everything within it. German carries several simultaneous resonances in this story. The most immediate is the Holocaust. German as the language of the perpetrators of the genocide that the Quincy arc is built in conscious parallel to. Every Quincy term arrives carrying that historical weight. German is also the language of the Protestant Reformation, of Calvin and Luther, the tradition that developed the theology of predestination and the divine election most fully, which is the theological system YHWACH's power operates on. It is the language of Germanic peoples whose mythology, the Norse tradition filtered through Old High German, provides the Odin and Valkyrie imagery running through the Stirnritters. The Quincy are built from all of these simultaneously. The practical effect of German in a Japanese manga is also significant. The terms sound foreign, heavy, ancient, European in a way that marks the Quincy as belonging to a tradition that predates and differs from the Soul Society's Japanese institutional structure. They are not a variant of the same system. They are something different, probably older, something the Soul Society grew up alongside, tried to destroy, and failed to fully erase. Soul Reapers fight with swords. Quincy fight with bows. The sword is the weapon of the person who enters conflict directly, who stands in the same space as the enemy, who commits their body to the fight. The bow is the weapon of the person who determines the outcome from outside the immediate confrontation, who aims from a distance, whose precision is the difference between contact and miss, who does not struggle alongside what they are killing but decides it. In myth, the bow is almost universally the weapon associated with divine judgment, delivered from above. Apollo in Greek mythology sends plague across the Greek camp at Troy through arrows, not entering the battle but changing its condition from a distance, his power arriving without warning. In Norse tradition, the death of Balder, the event that triggers the sequence leading to Ragnarok, comes from a single arrow. The archers of Hindu epic tradition, Arjuna in the Mahabharata, Rama in the Ramayana, are the destined figures whose aim is fated, whose shots determine the course of cosmic events. The bow is the weapon of the being who determines rather than participates. The Quincy as archers are symbolically positioned as dispensers of judgment, not participants in conflicts. The Vollstandig, complete in German, is the fully realized divine transformation Stirnritter achieve when they manifest their Quincy power at its highest expression. Its visual grammar is consistent. Halos, often angular or structural rather than simple circles. Wings, frequently geometric or crystalline rather than feathered. Light that functions as a weapon rather than just an illumination. And bodies that begin to succeed the structural logic of human form. Kubo is depicting what the prophetic books of the Hebrew Bible actually describe when they encounter divine beings, not what Renaissance painting decided angels should look like. The physical spaces of the Wandenreich are built in the visual language of Gothic cathedrals, soaring vertical spaces, pointed arches, the constant visual emphasis on height, stonework of inhuman precision. Gothic cathedrals were architectural theology. Every formal choice was an argument about the relationship between humans and the divine. The verticality was meant to make the eye move upward, because that is the direction of transcendence. The scale was meant to make the human body feel small against the immensity of what it was built to approach. The Wandenreich cathedral architecture makes this same statement from underground, which changes what it means. A cathedral built above ground reaches toward the sky, aspiring upward. The Wandenreich's cathedral spaces are built in the dark, beneath the institution that tried to erase Quincy civilization. Their grandeur is not aspiration, it is defiance. The message of the scale and the beauty is not we are reaching towards something greater, it is we built this here in the shadow while you thought we were finished, and it's magnificent. The Holy Roman Empire, known in retrospect as the First Reich, was founded in the 9th century and dissolved in 1806, making it a genuinely thousand-year empire. The Nazi Third Reich borrowed the term explicitly, claiming to be the heir of a tradition that had lasted a millennium. The Wandenreich 1000-year theme, YHWACH defeated 1,000 years ago. The arc, titled The Thousand-Year Blood War, the Kaisergesang prophecy structured in phases of 999 years, reflects this specific historical number. It is not simply a round dramatic figure, it is the duration of the First Reich the Empire Kubo was reaching toward. The structure of the Holy Roman Empire maps into the Wandenreich's hierarchy as well. The empire was ruled by a single Kaiser, an emperor, whose title was singular and absolute, the only person permitted the designation of majesty. Below him were orders of knights, who served the empire directly. The Stenritter's relationship to YHWACH mirrors this. They're not simply soldiers, but an order of elevated warriors, each holding a designation no one else holds, serving a king whose authority is categorically different from theirs. The eagle, the primary heraldic symbol of the Holy Roman Empire and of its Kaiser, appears on YHWACH's sword. It is the coat of arms of the institution Kubo was building in fictional form. The more specific and even more interesting template is the Teutonic Knights, a German military order founded during the Crusades in the 5th century. They began as a hospital order, providing medical care for pilgrims and wounded soldiers before formalizing into a military brotherhood. They wore white with black markings. Their leader carried the title of Grand Master. These details map directly onto the Quincy. The Quincy wear white. Jugram holds the title of Grand Master of the Stenritter, and Ryuken Ishida, the last pure-blood Quincy in the human world, the man who survived Auschwitz and chose to spend his life afterward as a doctor, almost certainly carries a possible reference to the Teutonic Knights' foundational role as healers. The order that began by establishing hospitals that defined itself through both the sword and medical care has its echo in the Quincy who put down the sword and opened a hospital instead. They were also often brutal and treacherous, as seen in Poland and Prussia, where they seized land, prioritized political power and wealth over religion, often resorting to massacres and forced conversions. The Teutonic Knights were eventually nearly destroyed. After centuries of military and political power, their order collapsed. Funnily enough, during World War II, the Nazis suppressed them and killed many of their members, using the imagery of the Teutonic Knights in their own propaganda while eliminating the actual order. The knights who survived numbered nearly in the thousands and rebuilt as a purely spiritual organization dedicated to hospital work. The parallel to the Quincy is almost exact. A once powerful order of holy warriors, nearly annihilated by another force, reduced to a handful of survivors, some of whom tried to keep the tradition alive in a diminished but unbroken form. All of these parallels, including the obvious Nazi Germany, have been European in nature, aligning with the northern origins of the Quincy. But there is a second layer sitting underneath it that is distinctly American. The Ku Klux Klan called their project the Invisible Empire, a hidden white supremacist nation operating inside an existing country's borders. The Japanese translation of Wandenreich is Invisible Empire. The KKK's white robes originated as Confederate ghost costumes meant to menace black communities by impersonating the dead. Their organizational titles, Grand Master, Grand Dragon, Grand Cyclops, belong to the same theatrical tradition of secret, sacred hierarchies as the Stenritter's Grand Master. None of this proves deliberate reference. What it reveals is the imagery Kubo assembled for the Wandenreich. white tropes, a grand master, a hidden empire, a Christian military brotherhood. These overlap with the clan's self-presentation because both reached into the same source material, the medieval crusading order, the secret spiritual hierarchy, the white-clad warriors of God. The shape they produce from those materials is the same. The Quincy were established early in Bleach as regular humans with supernatural weapons but ordinary bodies, not capable of superhuman physical feats, not built for the kind of combat the Sinister actually perform. The Thousand-Year Blood War ignores this completely, with no explanation. Then there is the age problem. YHWACH and Bazz B trained together over 1,000 years ago, and they show no deterioration or aging. And as Nodt is recruited from what is clearly a deathbed, hospital, life support, a Bible at his side, ready for last rites. The simplest resolution to this is that the Wandenreich is populated by the dead, not humans who survived the genocide and hid their aging bodies in the Shadow Realm for centuries, but people who actually died and were retained as Quincy, as deathbed recruits spirited away before complete dissolution, in a dimension that exists precisely at the literal boundary between the living world and soul society. It is possible, and it explains everything. The three Fullbringers who returned during the arc with their memories and powers intact establish that this is possible within the manga's own rules. Under this reading, the Ishida family were genuinely the last living Quincy. Everyone else in the Wandenreich was already dead. Lastly, there is Japan's Kakure Kirishitan, hidden Christians, who maintained their Catholic faith in secret for over 2 centuries after Christianity was banned and its practitioners systematically persecuted. They used coded symbols, disguised practices, and passed the tradition down through generations with no access to priests, surviving as a community defined entirely by secrecy and the memory of persecution. The Quincy, Catholic coded, hidden for generations, maintaining their tradition in the shadow of the dominant spiritual institution that tried to destroy them, rhyme with this history precisely enough that it cannot be entirely coincidental, whether Kubo composed the rhyme deliberately or not. The Nazi layer, the KKK layer, the Ghost Army, the hidden Christians. These are not separate references, they are the shape seen from different angles. A religious military order in white, a hidden empire, an army of people who were supposed to be finished. A Western haunting arriving in a world not built to receive it. The Wandenreich is an invisible empire, not because the German etymology produces that phrase. It is an invisible empire because that is literally what it is. An army of possible ghosts in white, commanded by a being with a powerful name, demanding recognition from the world that thought it had buried them. Now that we covered essentially everything, from origins to mythology, symbolism, possible inspirations and references, analyzing the patriarch and the king of Quincy and his powers, let's take a closer look at some of the other Quincy and what they bring to the story of Bleach. Jugram YHWACH's backstory begins as far from Quincy as a Quincy can be. He grew up with an abusive uncle, had no parents, and most humiliatingly for a Quincy, could not form a Heilig Bogen. He could not manifest the spirit bow that is the most fundamental expression of Quincy power. He was considered by those around him to be a Quincy born incomplete, a category that Bleach acknowledges occurs once every few decades. His response was to train obsessively with a sword, to become a swordsman in a tradition of archers, so that his lack of the most basic Quincy ability would not leave him helpless. He found a companion in Bazz B, a Quincy with enormous raw power who adopted YHWACH and pushed him to keep going. When YHWACH came and selected YHWACH as his right hand, the selection seemed incomprehensible. Bazz B, strong, talented, and obviously gifted, was passed over. YHWACH, the one who couldn't even form a bow, was chosen instead. The explanation YHWACH gave was this: YHWACH shares the same fundamental power that YHWACH himself has. The ability to passively amplify and distribute power to Quincy around him. The reason Bazz B was so strong was YHWACH. His inability to express Quincy power directly was because his power was the exact same power as YHWACH's, the power to give power to others, not to hold it for himself. He was not incomplete, he was the other half of something that needed two sides to function. The irony is layered. The person who seemed the most powerless was the person the king could not function without. The person who could not manifest the basic Quincy weapon was the person closest in nature to the source of all Quincy ability. And the person who trained alongside him, who believed in him when no one else did, was the person this choice most wounded. YHWACH's Schrift is B, the balance. His ability allows him to manipulate fortune and misfortune within his sphere of influence. Any good fortune his opponents experience in harming him is redirected back at them as equivalent misfortune. All of the misfortune directed at him personally is absorbed into his spirit weapon, the Freundschild, literally friend shield in German, a heavy shield on his left arm that stores and redirects suffering. He does not create misfortune, he redistributes it, enforcing a conservation law that the universe in his view operates by, regardless of whether anyone is paying attention or not. During the hours of YHWACH's sleep, YHWACH holds the Almighty. The power transfers between them at the day-night boundary. YHWACH holds the Almighty while awake, YHWACH holds it while YHWACH sleeps. YHWACH in turn gains the balance during his sleep, though he never uses it. They are described by YHWACH as two sides of a scale, two halves of a single power expressed in two different people. This shared power structure is the basis of the relationship. They're not king and subordinate in the ordinary sense, but something closer to a single entity divided into two complementary functions, each incomplete without the other. In his confrontation with Ishida Uryu, YHWACH explains his philosophy directly. The universe distributes misfortune according to a law of conservation. Happiness is not free. Every blessing is drawn from somewhere. The person who experiences good fortune does so in a world where that fortune came from somewhere else. His ability does not invent this dynamic, it makes it visible and controllable. He can collect the fortune and redirect the misfortune that the universe is already producing, enforcing the accounting that was already happening invisibly. This is one of the most honest answers to the problem of suffering that any character in Bleach offers, honest in the specific, limited sense of refusing to explain suffering away or justify it. The classical religious attempts to justify suffering, it builds character, it is part of larger good, it is the cost of freedom. All involve arguing that suffering is, from some wider perspective, worth it. YHWACH's position is simpler and colder. Suffering is not a problem with an explanation, it is a feature of the structure of existence, as fundamental and personal as the conservation of energy. The cost of every good thing is built into the universe's accounting. The only question is, who bears it? For those who wish to avoid Core 4 spoilers, please jump to this timestamp. His end is the most honest expression of this. When YHWACH uses the Auswählen on him, draining him as he drained others, YHWACH uses his remaining moments to transfer all of Uryu's injuries onto himself instead, encouraging Uryu to go on and save his friends. The man who spent his entire life enforcing the balance of misfortune chooses at the end where the misfortune falls. He accepts it himself. The Freundschild, the friend shield, proves its name in the most literal way at the last moment. The Schutzstaffel, protective echelon in German, is YHWACH's personal elite guard. Distinct from the broader Sinister, it consists of 4 members: Gerard Valkyrie, Lille Barro, Pernida Parankias, and Askin Levar. These are not simply the most powerful Sinister, even though they are the 4 beings YHWACH deploys when he ascends to the Soul King's palace, when the goal shifts from occupying Soul Society to destroying and absorbing the Soul King himself. They are his instruments for the final phase of the war, the fighters for whom the label elite is not an exaggeration. Their title, the Schutzstaffel, is not a reference or an echo, it is the German name of the SS. This paramilitary organization administered the concentration camps. Kubo names his Quincy elite after the organization that perpetrated one of the most systemic genocides in modern history. In a story built around the near genocide of the Quincy, the point is not moral equivalence, it is a statement about what survival under persecution can produce. Gerard Valkyrie, Stenditter M for the Miracle, is not simply the most powerful member of the Schutzstaffel, he is the heart of the Soul King, a fact confirmed within the arc. Consistent with the Stenditter who knew that his power did not come from YHWACH's Schrift assignment in a normal way, Gerard and Pernida are the only Stenditter whose abilities were not granted to them by YHWACH. They already had them. Their Schrift designations are acknowledgements of what they already were, not transformations. Notably, YHWACH doesn't give the Stenditter their abilities in general. He has the ability to see words as if they were engraved on the individual's body. Thus, he finds the respective individuals based on these embedded words. And then the Schrifts that went missing due to war losses and such. Those are the exact words Kubo used to answer a question about Schrift manifestation. The significance of the heart of the Soul King embodying the miracle is not accidental. The miracle in a religious tradition is the inexplicable occurrence of an impossibility when it is needed most. The divine breaking into the natural order to accomplish what natural forces cannot. Gerard's ability manifests the collective fear and belief of those around him. When his opponents insist he cannot survive what has been done to him, their certainty that it is impossible becomes the fuel for the impossible becoming real. He grows stronger in direct proportion to the magnitude of what seems to guarantee his defeat. The heart of a warrior is the thing that keeps going when everything else says stop. Gerard is this principle with a body, the physical expression of the Soul King's will to persist. His name points to Norse mythology. The Valkyries were Odin's choosers of the slain, the supernatural beings who rode over battlefields, selecting which warriors would die and be taken to Valhalla to train for Ragnarok. The Valkyrie principle is the selection of the worthy from battle. Gerard's power inverts this. The battlefield keeps selecting him for defeat, and each selection makes him more rather than less. He is the warrior who cannot be chosen for death, who rises in proportion to every force that should have finished him. Lille Barro, Stenditter X for the X-axis, holds a specific distinction between the Stenditters. He was the first Quincy to ever receive a Schrift from YHWACH. The X-axis is one of the most absolute powers in the arc, a line through his body along which anything he fires passes through every material substance without resistance. Walls, armor, spiritual barriers, the concept of physical obstruction itself, none of it applies. His shots do not penetrate in the way a powerful attack penetrates a defense. They simply pass through as if the obstacle does not occupy the same spatial category as the projectile. His Vollstandig transforms him into a robed divine figure with a large geometric halo and multiple pairs of wings, his body becoming more translucent, radiating damaging light. When he is defeated and regenerates, he comes back more inhuman than before. More eyes, more wings, his presence distributing itself across multiple simultaneous manifestations. He keeps returning, and each return exceeds the previous form. This trajectory is drawn from Ezekiel's vision, the biblical prophet's descriptions of being called the Ophanim, or at least clear inspirations from the Seraphim, The early form of Jiliel, robed, haloed, winged, represents the angel as human religious art has tried to render it. Lille's subsequent transformations trace the original text from the recognizable divine form to the distributed, geometrically impossible presence that Ezekiel actually described. Owls are also linked to angels in some cultures, and the Bible features owls figuratively to symbolize tormenting loneliness, desolation, mourning, and judgment. Lille Barro is obsessed with judgment. He keeps spotting sinful behavior and is passing judgment on those who sin against his leader. His base ability, absolute penetration, nothing interposes between his shot and its target, is the divine quality of reaching through rather than around, the characteristic of a force to which no physical boundary applies. Pernida Parankias Stenditter C for the compulsory is the Soul King's left arm, a fact established both by the lore surrounding the Soul King's dismemberment and by its explicit confirmation within the arc. Like Gerard, Pernida did not receive its power from YHWACH, it already was what it is. Its designation C is an honorary acknowledgement of an ability that belongs to its nature as the Soul King's left arm, the compulsory, the power to extend its nerves into organic material and compel that material to evolve and reshape according to its will. The key to understanding Pernida is what the Soul King's left arm is said to govern: progress. The right arm, Mimihagi, governs stillness, the stopping of development and change. The left arm gathers advancement, the forcing of change, the compulsion of evolution, the relentless forward movement of transformation, regardless of whether the thing being transformed is ready or willing. These are the two fundamental principles of existence in tension. Things staying as they are and things becoming other than they are. The Soul King, when complete, held both in balance. His severed arms, each developing autonomously over centuries, embody one of those principles without the counterbalancing presence of the other. What Pernida does to organic matter is literally the principle of progress, expressed as a weapon. It forces things to change, to evolve in the direction of its own neutral structure, to become something else, whether or not that change is survivable. Bodies it touches begin to twist and compress as alien neutral pathways are forced through them. It is compulsory evolution, change as violence, progress as imposition. The left arm of balance, separated from the right arm of stillness, becomes the most disturbing expression of what the divine principle of advancement looks like without anything to temper it. In religion iconography, the left hand carries the associations of the sinister, from the Latin sinistra, the hidden, the ambiguous, the things that cannot be done openly. The right hand blesses, the left hand does what the right hand cannot acknowledge. Pernida is the divine creative power, severed from intention, the ability to reshape without the wisdom to know what the reshaping should accomplish. The force of progress detached from any purpose that would make progress good. Askin Naklavar Sternitter D for the death dealing is almost always smiling. He is chatty, apparently relaxed, frequently engaged in what sounds like casual conversation in the middle of a situation that should produce urgency. He is also one of the most dangerous members of the Schutzstaffel. The is not a performance, it is the genuine expression of a person for whom the proximity of death has become ordinary. His power, the death dealing, manipulates lethal dosage. Every substance has a threshold beyond which it becomes fatal to a specific body. The amount of water, reiatsu, oxygen, blood, or anything else that crosses the line from necessary to lethal. Askin can raise or lower that threshold for any substance in relation to any targets. He can make someone's own blood toxic to the body it flows through. He can make the air they breathe lethal at normal concentrations. He does not introduce a foreign poison, he adjusts the line between medicine and death. This power is drawn from the founding principle of toxicology as a discipline, The 16th century physician and alchemist Paracelsus, considered the father of the field, formulated the core insight of his science as the dose makes the poison. No substance is inherently safe or toxic. The difference between medicine and poison is the quantity, the context, and the body receiving it. Arsenic was used medicinally. Water is lethal in sufficient quantity. Everything exists on a spectrum from beneficial to lethal, and where any particular dose falls on that spectrum depends entirely on circumstances. Askin's ability is this insight turned into a weapon. He does not add poison to the world, he moves the line. His demeanor, the ease, the casual comfort with lethal situations, the absence of urgency about death, reflects a person who has genuinely ceased to fear what he spends his time studying. He is not performing fearlessly. He has simply spent enough time at the edge of the lethal threshold that the fear that would normally accompany that proximity has been exhausted. The tragedy embedded in his character is that this genuine release from fear, this authentic comfort with mortality, produces not wisdom, but the world's most clinical killer. Next to the other mythical divine elites, Askin is the newest member, the most casual, and yet somehow the most lethal of the bunch. As Nodt was a dying man in a hospital before YHWACH found him, bedridden in chronic pain, terrified of what was waiting on the other side of the death he was approaching. YHWACH gave him power and continued existence. Everything he became afterward was shaped by what he feared at the moment of his transformation. His ability injects boundless instinctive fear into anyone his reishi thorns touch. Not fear of him specifically, not a response to a specific threat, but the primordial terror itself, raw and unmediated. The philosopher Kierkegaard distinguished ordinary fear, which has an object and resolves when the object is removed, from what he called angst, the dread that attaches to existence itself, to the awareness that you are alive and therefore will cease. As Nodt weaponizes this, his opponents do not become afraid of the situation, they are stripped of every psychological buffer between ordinary consciousness and the direct awareness of their mortality. His Vollstandig, Tatar Foras, leaves him with blood streaming from his eyes, his face lipless and decaying, a row of stitching running down his body. He looks like someone who has been to the edge of the void and came back wearing the marks of it, because that is what he is. The man who was afraid of death was given that fear as a weapon. Bazz B grew up as part of modest nobility. 6 months after he and YHWACH met as children and began training together, YHWACH's forces invaded the northern territories. Sinister soldiers killed Bazz B's mother, and YHWACH himself fired his Zangtbogen and destroyed the castle. YHWACH's forest was also burned and his uncle died. When YHWACH came to recruit Sinister and selected YHWACH as his right hand instead of Bazz B, everything collapsed, and the reveal that Bazz B's talent and power was just an effect of YHWACH being beside him. Bazz B joined the Sinister 3 years later. His talent was, in significant part, YHWACH's gift to him, unasked for. When the Auswählen drains the Sinister during the second invasion, Bazz B survives but turns immediately on YHWACH, and then later seeks out YHWACH directly. Furious not only at YHWACH's betrayal, but at YHWACH's 1,000-year silence about the plan they once shared. He is defeated by YHWACH and left to die. Fire in mythology cannot be permanently redirected from its origin points. His fire was always going to return to the source, to YHWACH, who burned his home, and to YHWACH, who chose the king over the friend. Bambi Basterbine is the Sinister who most completely embodies the Wandenreich internal logic of power at the individual level. She brutally kills enemies and her own allies for her own use. She has simply absorbed the Wandenreich operating principle. Power is the only meaningful metric, and she is applying it with full consistency. Her shrift, the Explode, embeds explosive reishi into whatever she hits and detonates it at will, reducing everything in range to scattered force. After her defeat and death in battle, Giselle Gewel raises her as a zombie and uses her as a weapon. The YHWACH uses this transition with precision. The person who applied the Wandenreich's logic of utility to those around her is now being applied as a utility by someone else. Bambietta used people until they stopped being useful. Giselle uses Bambietta because she is still useful, dead. The logic runs through both of them in the same direction. What distinguishes one from the other is only who, in the current moment, holds the power. Toto is the most practically minded of the Stenditter group, and my personal favorite of the group. Her Schrift, the Glutton, enormously extends her mouth to consume targets with crushing force and sharp teeth. A direct and physical ability that matches her direct, unsentimentalized approach to everything. She does not perform loyalty, she does not feel, and does not disguise calculation as devotion. She fights effectively, survives encounters that kill others, and keeps track of what things actually cost. Her defining moment is what she does when the Auswählen comes, when YHWACH drains the Stenditter to restore his Schutzstaffel, killing many of them. Lille Toto and Giselle survive, but people they fought alongside do not. Her response is to immediately turn on YHWACH and attempt to kill him. Shortly before this, in a moment of equal significance, she kills Pepe Wakabrada herself after he attempts to use his love ability on her. She is the YHWACH's purest expression of the ordinary soldier's relationship to an institution that claims her loyalty and then treats her as expendable. The person who refuses to frame betrayal as anything other than what it is, and who acts accordingly the moment she has the information she needs. The true holder of the Schrift S is James, the small bald man who follows Musk the Muskerin and cheers for him from the sidelines. Musk is a manifestation of what James considers his ideal hero. The fighter James imagined when he imagined the perfect champion, the S, the superstar. When James cheers, the Schrift activates. Musk heals, amplifies, and becomes progressively more powerful with each round of support. When James is destroyed, Musk can resurrect him too, using the life link that exists between them, so that James can cheer again. When Musk dies, YHWACH notes that James has died and absorbs his reishi, confirming that James was the Stenditter. The visual protagonist of the duo, the one doing all the fighting, is not the source of the power. This inversion is the entire point. Lucha Libre and professional wrestling more broadly is one of the most complete examples of how collective belief generates something real and operative. The luchador is not merely a fighter performing for entertainment, they are a character in an ongoing community drama, and the crowd's emotional investment is the fuel that makes the performance meaningful. Without the crowd, the performance is hollow. James is the congregation. Musk is the ritual the congregation performs. The Schrift confirms this structurally. The divine quality of the superstar lives in the believer, not in the one being believed in. Genuine devotion generates genuine force. Gremmy's Schrift is the visionary. Whatever he imagines becomes real. Meteorites, the vacuum of space, a target's body suddenly in water or becoming biscuits, an opponent whose power dares to match that of Zaraki Kenpachi. There is no elemental constraint and no scale limit. He is also revealed to be a brain in a jar. His physical body is literally just a brain, and the human form he presents is itself a construct of his imagination. He used this same power to create two other Stenditter himself, Gnail Li, who could erase himself from others' perception, and Shaz Domino, who later became an honorary Stenditter under his own name. The power he embodies is ex nihilo creation, the divine act of bringing something into existence through will alone. Gremmy's defeat by Kenpachi is a precise argument about where this power ends. He imagines a version of Kenpachi strong enough to defeat the real one, and that imagined version's power destroys Gremmy's own body, because he cannot contain what he has created. The thing that defeats imagination is not greater imagination, it is existence that was never imagined, or one simply impossible to fully capture. a being so fully and completely what it is that constructing a concept of it always produces something smaller than the reality. Kenpachi is not a thought, and his power is so immense he does not even grasp it. His own body cannot contain it. He simply is. Before there were 3 worlds, there was one, a single chaotic place where the living and the dead existed together, hunted constantly by hollows. The being who would become the Soul King emerged from that chaos, not as a ruler, but as a protector. He killed hollows to keep the world's people safe. Then, the most powerful beings of that era, the ancestors of soul societies, noble families, captured him. His power was used to split the world into 3, the living world, Soul Society, and Hueco Mundo. Then, to make sure he could never oppose them, they cut him apart. His arms, his legs, his organs, all removed and scattered. What remained was sealed in a crystal and suspended in a palace above Soul Society, kept alive not as a king, but as a mechanism. His existence is the lock that holds the 3 worlds apart. Without him, everything collapses back into one. His name is Jean Bleach. His name is Adneus. Almost no one knows or uses it. The name itself is a clue. Like stated earlier, it probably comes from Adonai, from the Hebrew Bible, just like the name of his son. But it most likely comes from Adonaios, one of the 7 archons in Gnostic religious tradition, the intermediate beings who administer a world built wrong. In Gnostic thought, the true God did not make the physical world. A lesser, flawed being did, the demiurge, and the archons maintain his order, keeping divine sparks trapped inside it. Kubo clearly may have built this structure directly into Bleach. The Soul Reapers are the Archons, genuinely powerful, genuinely committed to maintaining order, and completely dependent on a foundation they never chose to examine. An imprisoned being whose suffering is the price of their stability. YHWACH is correct that the system is built on a crime, his solution absorbing the Soul King and making himself the new ground of all existence does not end the crime. It just replaces one captive with a consuming tyrant. The pieces of the Soul King that were cut away did not stay inert. His right arm became Mimihagi, a fallen drifting to the outer districts of Rukongai, worshipped at a small shrine by people with nowhere else to turn. His left arm became Pernida. His heart became Gerard Valkyrie. Each piece developed its own consciousness, its own identity, its own allegiances, and those allegiances split in opposite directions. Mimihagi stayed connected to the Soul King's will, trying to protect the world. Pernida joined YHWACH's army, eventually fighting against everything the Soul King represented. The dismemberment did not just weaken him, it turned parts of him against each other. This is most visible in what Mimihagi did for Ukitake Jushiro. When Ukitake was 3 years old and dying of a lung disease, his parents carried him to Mimihagi's shrine. Mimihagi took his lungs and the damaged parts, and in doing so kept him alive. It could not heal him, it could only stop the dying. He had been Mimihagi's vessel since he was 3 years old. When the time came, he gave the rest of his body so Mimihagi could rise and try to hold the 3 worlds together in the Soul King's place. It was not enough. YHWACH absorbed Mimihagi. Ukitake died, but for a moment, a severed piece tried to do the work of the whole body it came from, and could not. Because a fragment is always only a fragment. This is what makes the Soul King genuinely tragic rather than just a plot device. He did not choose to become a prisoner, even though YHWACH hints at the possibility of him allowing it to happen. He built something to protect people and was imprisoned inside it. His children YHWACH by blood, the Quincy as a whole by extension, his body parts by separation, went to war with each other inside the world he created. And through all of it, he floated, conscious and immobile, behind the crystal in a palace no one could reach. Seeing everything that would happen 1,000 years before it did. He saw the Quincy nearly wiped out. He saw YHWACH coming. He saw what would be done to him. According to YHWACH, he saw all of it and did nothing. And whether that was because he could not or because he chose not to, the text never fully answers. That silence is the point. The being at the center of the world does not speak, does not act, does not rule. He holds. And when he is finally gone, the world he held together shakes itself apart. And the people left inside it have to figure out how to keep going without the lock that kept everything in place. Ishida Uryu introduces himself as the last Quincy in the human world, and the story takes its time showing what that actually means. He makes his own weapons, he wears white, the color of a tradition that was hunted nearly to extinction. He is precise and formal even in a fight. Not because he is performing anything, but because the tradition has become part of how he carries himself. He is someone who inherited a culture so completely that it lives in his posture and his habits, not just his words. But underneath that, he grew up largely alone with it. His grandfather Soken trained him and was killed, not simply by Hollows, but by the deliberate negligence of Kurotsushi Mayuri, who bribed the Shinigami sent to protect Soken so that he could claim his soul for research. Uryu did not know the full truth of this for years, but he knew enough that the Shinigami had not come and that his grandfather had died waiting for them. His father, Ryuken, meanwhile, keeps his distance and explains very little, insisting the Quincy should go extinct with his generation and telling his son to stop. Uryu has the uniform, the techniques, the Quincy cross, all of the outer signs of what he is, without the people who would have given those signs their full meaning. He is the last of something, but he was never told the whole story of what it cost to become the last. That gap is what YHWACH steps into. After the Wandenreich's assault on Soul Society, YHWACH announces that his successor will not be Jugram, his right-hand man, the obvious choice, but Ishida Uryu, a stranger to every Stenritter in the room. His reason? Uryu was the only gemished Quincy to survive the YHWACH 9 years earlier, when YHWACH drained power from every mixed blood Quincy to restore himself. Every single one died. Uryu did not. Uryu carries something in his blood capable of surpassing even YHWACH's power, so he gives him the Schrift A, the same letter YHWACH himself holds, and names him heir. What YHWACH does not say and may not fully reckon with is the specific cruelty of this choice. The YHWACH that Uryu survived is the same event that killed his mother, the thing that made Uryu special in YHWACH's eyes, produced by the same act that took her from him. The king chose as his successor the person with the most personal reason to end him. Uryu accepts. He puts on the white Stenritter uniform and joins the Wandenreich. To Ichigo, to everyone who knows him, it looks like a betrayal, and Kubo writes it to feel exactly like one. Uryu says nothing to explain himself. What he is doing is not a change of heart, it is the only available path to the one action he intends to perform. The only way to stand beside YHWACH is to be his trusted heir. He does it for his mother, not for the Quincy people as an idea, not for Soul Society for sure, not for the balance between worlds, for Kanae Katagiri specifically, one person killed by the king of her own people. His whole arc and his final act in the war is not a grand statement about what the Quincy were or what they deserved. It is a son fighting something that only grief could ask of him. And the story does not reward this with a triumph. When YHWACH falls, the Wandenreich ends, and there is no restoration of the Quincy tradition, no community rebuilt, no monument to what was lost. Uryu does not become anything new, he continues. In a world changed by everything that happened, carrying the same obligation and the same loss he always carried. The series suggests quietly that continuing is enough. Not a victory, just what comes next. Now let's get back to even more lore, etymology, and symbolism. Taitakubo did not build the 1000-year Blood War arc in a vacuum. The structure, the characters, the symbols, and even specific events were drawn directly from religious texts, philosophy, and mythology, layered carefully enough that most of it works even without recognizing the sources, but becomes much richer once you do. The clearest of those sources is the Book of Revelation. The basic shape of the final arc mirrors it almost exactly. The Son of God returns after a long absence, leading an army to wage final war against those who abandoned the divine order. In Revelation, Jesus is set to reign as king for 1,000 years before launching the final war against God's enemies. The 1,000-year blood war itself is Armageddon, YHWACH's goal, destroying the current world and recreating the old, perfect world without death, mirrors what the Revelation promises: a new paradise where the righteous live in eternal existence. Even specific events in the arc have direct parallels. The war begins when 7 Quincy appear in Yamamoto's office to announce it, echoing the 7 angels who blow their trumpets to signal the start of the final war in Revelation. The eternal darkness that falls once the second invasion begins mirrors the cosmic darkness described in the Apocalypse. The resurrection of the dead appears through the zombie ability. Gremmy's meteor corresponds to the fall of Wormwood, the burning star that poisons the earth. And Lille Barro's final transformed state, a monstrous, multi-winged, barely human entity raining light down from above, echoes the monstrous birds sent to feast on the sinners left behind. The YHWACH deserves its own reading. At first glance, it looks like a reference to the Holocaust, a selection process that kills a people defined by their blood. But the logic is actually inverted, exactly as the rapture functions in evangelical theology. YHWACH himself carries 2 overlapping identities from scripture, and they are not as separate as they might seem. His name is a direct transliteration of Yahweh, the unspoken name of God in the Hebrew Bible. He is also simultaneously a Christ figure, the Son of God who performs miracles, conducts a blood ritual with his followers, returns after a long imprisonment, and leads an army in the final war. Some readers have argued that he must be the Antichrist rather than Christ because of how brutal he is, but this misreads both Revelation and Bleach. In Revelation, Jesus is not always depicted as gentle. He personally orders massacres, leads the army of heaven in slaughter, and declares he comes not with peace but with a sword. He is cold toward his enemies and toward those he deems impure. YHWACH's behavior is not a departure from the Christ of Revelation specifically. It is faithful to it. On the other side of the conflict, Aizen functions as the devil, and Kubo even marked this with chapter numbers. Kenpachi returns in chapter 666, the popular number of the beast, but scholars believe 616 is the true number, and Aizen returns in that chapter. Kenpachi invokes the image of the devil as modern culture imagines it: monstrous, violent, demonic. Aizen operates as the devil actually functions in Revelation. A fallen being who rebelled against the divine order, was cast into the abyss, and was eventually freed to play his role in the final confrontation. Aizen was a fallen Shinigami who abandoned Soul Society, gathered an army of hollows, creatures associated with sin and consumption, and he sought the empty throne in the heavens. His final transformation carried visual echoes of William Blake's Great Red Dragon paintings. And, like the devil bound at the start of Revelation, he spent the arc imprisoned in Muken before being released into the final battle. The character of Ichibe Hyosube maps onto the false prophet, the third figure in Revelation's unholy trinity. The false prophet speaks in the name of God, claims to act according to divine will, and spreads a version of truth that serves the system rather than the divine. Ichibe proclaims himself the guardian of the Soul King's will, the keeper of all names and all truth in Soul Society. In reality, he is the Soul King's jailer, loyal not to the imprisoned being, but to the ancestors of the noble families who built the current order. He spreads the story that makes the system look legitimate. He is the propaganda arm of a world built on a lie. Underneath all of this religious architecture runs a philosophical current drawn from Nietzsche. Volume 47 of Bleach features Nietzsche's declaration that with the rise of science and modern thought, the old foundations of morality and meaning have collapsed. If God does not exist, then the rules we built around God have no grounding. That's the argument. He theorizes that what we do with that realization defines us. In Bleach, the revelation that the Soul King is an imprisoned, mutilated, nearly mindless figure, not a ruler but a mechanism, is that moment becoming literal within the Bleach narrative. The foundation is not divine, it is a crime, and 5 characters respond to this knowledge in 5 different ways. Ichibe knows the truth and serves the system anyway, not from genuine belief but from obedience to the ancestors who built it. Aizen knows the truth and uses it to justify his own ambition, but has no actual vision for what comes after. He wants the throne, but he has no idea what he would do sitting in it. YHWACH knows the truth and builds towards a genuine alternative, but the alternative is restoration rather than something new. He wants to return to the old world, a world that was lost, not create one that never existed. Urahara knows the truth and chooses to maintain the current world anyway, not from slave morality, but from his own genuine conviction that the status quo, imperfect as it is preferable to what replacing it would cost. Lille Barro is worth another closer look as well. He was the first Quincies to whom YHWACH bestowed the shrift, which in his own telling makes him the closest to God, the messenger, the herald, the one who precedes and announces. His Vollstandig translates to judgment of God, and his transformed state, multi-winged, monstrous, raining light down on sinners, is modeled on biblically accurate angels. He is the angel of the trumpet, the herald of the end. When Kyoraku's Bankai cannot kill him and he transforms further into something between an angel, an owl, and a dragon, he becomes exactly what the Book of Revelation says awaits those who resist the divine judgments. Something beyond ordinary opposition, something that requires a sacred weapon to put down. Finally, the Schutzstaffel as a group are not the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Kubo clarified this himself. They represent 4 eras of human warfare. Gerard is ancient combat, a Norse fighter who battles like a gladiator. Pernida is medieval, using arrows and complex strategies. Askin is modern, deploying biological and chemical weapons. And Lille is present day, a long-range sniper who never needs to be near his target. The point that Kubo was making is that war across all of human history has been understood as a path to peace. The Schutzstaffel represent humanity's recurring belief that if you can just win this war, the one after it will never have to happen. They fight for a king whose entire vision is the final war, the one that ends all wars by ending the conditions that make war possible. 1,000 years ago, YHWACH fought Soul Society and lost. Now, he is back. Everyone who lived through the first war, Yamamoto and the oldest of Shinigami, YHWACH himself knew the second war was coming. The Soul Society spent a millennium building its institutions and training its people. YHWACH spent centuries sealed away, slowly restoring his power. The Wandenreich spent 1,000 years hidden underground, preparing. Neither side stumbled into this conflict. Both of them walked towards it deliberately, knowing it was destination. This is the structure of Ragnarok. In Norse mythology, the end of the world is not a surprise. Odin knows it is coming. The Norns have already woven it into fate. What Odin can do is prepare, build Valhalla, gather warriors, seek out wisdom through sacrifice. Not because preparation will prevent the end, but because the end deserves to be met with everything you have. When Ragnarok comes and almost everyone falls, it is not a failure, it is a completion. The 1,000-year blood war ends the same way. YHWACH is defeated, but Soul Society does not win cleanly either. At the center of the war is YHWACH's goal, which is stranger and more genuinely felt than a simple desire for conquest. Collapsing the boundaries of the 3 worlds into a single existence where the separation between the living and the dead no longer works. In this world, no one would die in the way death currently operates. No one would be made permanently unreachable. The people taken from you would not be gone. He reframes this as mercy, and within his own experience, it has the logic of mercy. He knows what it means for an entire people to be hunted to near extinction. He knows what it means to have communities made permanently unreachable by death. The world he wants to build is a direct answer to that specific pain. The Zoroastrian tradition has a name for this kind of vision, Frashokereti, the final renovation of the universe at the end of time. When the dead are resurrected, evil is permanently destroyed and all of existence is brought into a state of wholeness. It is the ultimate answer to suffering, the cosmic conclusion where everything lost is returned. YHWACH wants something structurally identical to this. The difference that makes his vision something else entirely is that the merged existence would be organized around him. He absorbs the Soul King, becomes the new foundation of all existence, and the world continues, not as a restored order where everyone is free, but as something that exists inside YHWACH rather than alongside him. His mercy is genuine. His need to be the source of that mercy, to be what the world runs on, is what his opponents refuse. They are not wrong to refuse it. After everything we have covered, the Norse mythology, the Abrahamic theology, the German history, the Gnostic cosmology, the biblical angels, the hidden Christians, the ghost army, the invisible empire. What becomes clear is that Kubo did not pick these references randomly. Every single layer of the Quincy points in that same direction. A people defined by loss, by persecution, by a faith they refuse to abandon, even in hiding, armed with divine imagery and a king who carries a heavy name. All of it is in service of one question: what does it mean to be right about the world and still lose? The Quincy understood something about the nature of souls that Soul Society could not afford to let them act on. They had the theology, the history, the mythology to back up every claim they made about themselves. Their angels were real, their powers were real, their king was genuinely chosen, their grief was legitimate, and none of it saved them. Kubo built one of the most mythologically dense factions in the history of shonen manga, and then showed you systematically how even the deepest spiritual architecture fails when the people carrying it are deemed expendable by the world they live in and the king they follow. That is what the Quincy lore is actually about. Not power, not war, the weight of everything they were and the silence that followed. YHWACH was not wrong about the problem. Death produces suffering. The cycle is brutal. His diagnosis was correct. What he missed is that removing death does not remove the thing that makes death painful. It removes everything that makes life meaningful alongside it. Connection, protection, love. These only exist because loss is real. You cannot eliminate the grief without eliminating what generates it. And then there is the more personal failure. He built his entire campaign on using his own people as fuel. He drained the Sinister with the Auswählen the moment the accounting required it. Soldiers who had served him for centuries, discarded. A king who promised his people they would never truly be lost, treated them as expendable the moment it was convenient. This is what he missed. He wanted to destroy a system that made people expendable. He ran that campaign by making people expendable. He became the thing he was trying to end and never noticed, or noticed and decided it didn't apply to him, which is ironically the oldest failure in the history of people who believe they were chosen. And that's the third main Bleach lore video done. Definitely the most complex and challenging since the Quincy are the most dense faction, I would say, in Bleach, and like I mentioned before, Kubo's most confusing part of the story. I hope that was coherent enough to understand them just a little better for some of you and found some value and joy from watching it. You can directly support my work here through Patreon to justify the continuation of this channel and the amount of work I put into these obscure topics and breakdowns. YouTube just keeps getting worse and the videos get less views and ads, and this one, like most, will probably get demonetized anyways. So consider assisting my groceries in exchange for some extra content like a companion director's commentary video that is out now on Patreon, where I discuss the process, my vision for this video, and what I cut out, along with some other analysis, and all of the things that went into making it. I will be making a video like this, a director's commentary, with every major long-form video I make. So if you're interested in that and getting the scripts of the videos, plus many other things like manga read-throughs, exclusive videos, and other stuff, you will find the link pinned in the comments. Huge thanks to my patrons, absolute legends. Stay safe, sexy, and hydrated. And with that, see you in the next one.